would probably very well know, right? The unlisted space does about 15,000 crores. The listed space does about another 15,000 crores. So you have roughly about 30,000 crores of capital in CSR that gets spent every year, or that is meant to be spent every year, and this is growing. And you have roughly about 20,000 crores. Numbers are hard because philanthropists don't talk about the kind of money that they're putting in. So because there is a lot of reticence in terms of talking about what they do, right? So, but the estimates are anywhere between 20 and 25,000 crores of capital that comes in from UHNIs alone, and this capital is growing. This capital is growing more than 15% per year. Now look at this whole bunch of pieces, this whole thing, right? So you have 30,000 crores, you have another 20,000 crores, that's 50,000 crores. Our study shows that this 20,000 crores of philanthropic capital, personal philanthropic capital, can actually grow to 75,000 crores per annum. Now this is a gigantic pool of money, right? Now I was hearing Soumya Leshkari talking in the previous panel. She was saying that she's getting a 6x on her investment. Many of you talked about much larger numbers. Now can you imagine a 50,000 crore pool of capital, 6x, right? You're pretty much talking about solving many of India's social problems. Right. So the whole idea is how can we put these two pieces together, which is that there is private capital available, there is a lot of intent available, but how do you put that together and put financial leverage to it? But why it doesn't happen, I have some thoughts of, but I'll talk about that in my next piece.
Yeah, we'll hold off on your thoughts, but I do want to say, I think the one thing, of course, I think the way you've put it is very, very simple, and I think that's something that we all need to strive to do in the sector if we really want to try and convert more capital into coming into blended finance. So Matilda, over to you. I mean, CSR is sort of the hot topic as well. How do we get more CSR into blended finance? So maybe talk about, and you're one of the few progressive people that we talked about in the previous panel who are the converts in some sense. So we don't really need convincing. So how are you looking at blended finance when you look at your portfolio within the CSR spend?
First of all, thanks to everybody who has stayed back after a very interesting previous panel. So just to introduce, I head CSR at IndusInd Bank, and I think privileged to be part of IndusInd, who has always been taking risk, whether it's in banking or at CSR. So in banking, I think IndusInd Bank was the first one to start with mobile phones number as your account number, the first for wearables, so many more. And when you look at CSR, I think when 2016 sports was added as part of the Schedule 7, we were the first organization to start supporting sports, inclusive sports. And in the last Tokyo Olympics, we had 8 medal tally out of the 19 medals for India. And this year, the Paralympics, there are 5 medals out of the overall 25 medal tally for India. So quite, actually thinking about getting into inclusive sports itself was a big decision, at a senior level. In addition to that, we really re-looked at our strategy way back in 2021 when the new CSR amendments had come in. And we said, okay, let's look at improving the income level for the marginalized community. That was one. And so we got into holistic rural development in aspirational districts. So aligning with government priorities is very critical for us. Then collaboration is also very key, both with government and with other corporates. So if you look at the outcome-based funding, we were the first domestic corporate CSR which came up with the outcome-based funding in education, the Haryana DIP, along with Social Finance, Central Square Foundation, and Language and Learning Foundation, where we had 4x result. The entire thought process there is like when you're looking at blended finance or you're looking at outcome-based financing, how do you create a pricing mechanism where in case you do a standalone grant making vis-a-vis a blended finance or an outcome-based financing, the cost per beneficiary, cost efficiency improves. That is one. The second is that how do you basically create or codify a model or create a proof of concept, which then after successful execution of that project can be picked up by the government or the education department to basically have a much more large scale impact. For example, in the Haryana DIP, we supported 6 districts in Haryana. We collaborated with SBI Foundation, which came for 1 district. At the end of the entire DIP and 4X result, we had Haryana government going and implementing it in all 22 districts. So that's how we look at blended finance, where you have key stakeholders or different actors in the ecosystem, be it the government, public and private partnerships, where you can have a proof of concept which then can be scaled up. So just to come back to where we see an opportunity for blended finance in our current portfolio, we have a holistic rural development program in 5 aspirational districts. We did a very detailed baseline and DPR, and the requirement of funding there is 10 times than the type funding that we have. So for 5 years, we are again not into short-termism, which is very common in CSR. We look at long-term bets. Over a 5 years period, we'll be putting in close to $30 million, $40 million. But the requirement is huge. There's a huge gap funding. How can blended finance come in and bridge this gap? And when you're looking at holistic rural development, we're working on water, soil, the agri-value chain, farm-based and non-farm-based livelihood, and WASH. All these key interventions will result in increase in income levels, better quality of life, and better human development index, totally aligned with SDG requirement, right, when it comes to financing. So each of this leg, if you look at, when you're working on water, in Virudnagar, there's an 800 years old entire network of ponds and tanks which have been created by a dynasty 800 years back. But we're still talking about water deficit. But there's a huge amount of funding required to basically rejuvenate or repair all this defunct ponds and tanks. We are putting in money just by whatever investment we've done in the runway year. We have seen that 165 wells have seen higher water levels. So you're working on the systems, you're working on the hydraulic tables, right? Then when you're talking about, we're having WASH innovations along with ASCII as part of the India Innovation Hub, where we have innovations being exhibited at a district level, and the district is basically going to scale it up in the entire district. So for example, if I'm putting 1 crore, the district, I see 1x amount which will be put in by the district. So when you talk about WASH MSMEs, the funding both in terms of equity and debt is a challenge. How can blended finance come in along with DFI and CSR coming in both in terms of catalytic funding and capacity building of the ecosystem is where I think there's a huge white space.
Thanks, Matilda. I think like maybe for me the two important takeaways, and thank you for giving that whole spectrum approach. I think there are areas that blended finance can come in, where you actually see commercial capital being able to participate. But that's not to take away from all the impactful work that's actually happening. So if you take a district, while you may be working in 5 or 6 different thematic areas, there may be a few that blended finance where they can really come in and bring that leverage in as well. But I think this is a good seg, and Santashil, I want to come to you. You've been instrumental in seeding a very powerful idea within MOSG. So it's a venture capital fund for for social innovation and incubation. So if you can talk about that a little bit, and how are you looking at leveraging blended finance to really set that government's really bringing to the table as well?
Sure. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. So I represent really the government on this panel. All right, I'm a fellow at the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment for 1 year, helping design. I'm part of the Economic Inclusion Division. So what this ministry is about is really the socially and economically weaker sections of our society, right? And there are almost 15,000 crores of money spent by the department on social justice, really, right? Around scholarships and social equity and essentially and very low cost concessional finance, loans, and all of that, right? So this was more of, was realized to design as a empowerment, right? So more of creating capabilities and wealth at the bottom of the pyramid. So what about the fund we are talking about is, which last 6 months or so been helping design is a 2,500 crore fund for for this sector essentially, right? The sector is about, and there are two parts, right? How we have planned it. One part is that a percentage of the money, which is at minimum 10%, is what we have planned is for capacity building, for technical assistance, because there was a version of the thing which was running previously, and a lot of failures because just dumping large amount of money primarily in as a loans did not work out well, and we are talking about like up to 1 to 10 crores of per venture of funding. All right, so part one is essentially around capacity building, where we see a lot of potential leveraging the blending, the outcome based, where if the capability, if various companies also co-participate and help in creating the capability, for creating the capacity such that such people become eligible for receiving the grants and the bigger fundings that this fund also enables, right? That's a clear direct linkage to outcome we can potentially make without much cost at all, right? And then we are planning to give out a bunch of grants and safe kind of instruments between 20 lakhs to 50 lakhs. And we have, as I mentioned, right, 12,000 crores are spent in education, right, in terms of scholarships throughout the country every year. So from there we have already a big version. And the last part is essentially around all kinds of equity and debt, both kinds of financing for scaling up many of these ventures. So that's the current plan.
Got it. And thank you. I think you also touched upon something very critical, the whole technical assistance aspect, right? When you talk about blended finance, that's often an instrument that doesn't get talked about enough, but is super critical as you're looking to develop, newer sectors or start maybe, providing access to capital or solve for affordability. So how do you actually design structures in a certain way? That technical assistance aspect is so critical that often doesn't get talked
Yeah,
about.
a lot of people, like for example, the legal pieces, the paperwork, creating everything, the agreements for applying for other finances, loans, that's costs a lot of money, and many of the segments that we are targeting is unable to do that. Right?
Got it. No, thank you. So this was meant to be a lead discussant format. So maybe just to switch things up a little bit, we'll invite audience questions, more like a a rapid fire, but we'll try and limit it to maybe 2 questions just now, and then we'll do a few more questions after the round 2. So if there are any burning questions in the audience, now's the time. Put your hands up, and if you want to direct it to someone specifically on the panel, please let us know. Otherwise, I'll maybe do the honors. Yeah.
So it's a very selfish question for Amrita. Amrita, are you still doing sort of financing for EVs or support the way you did with Refin and Mufin? Is that still happening? Do you have any plans to do more programs around that?
So we have a live program with SIDBI that was initiated last year. So that facility is there for another 5 years to go till the facility depletes itself. So given an average loan tenure of 24 to 36 months for the EV financing, we think that it will be a twice recycled facility, right? So right now we have a good 4 financiers who have taken up the guarantee already, and there are 4 more in the pipeline. So it's moving fast, and we have completed around 8 months to that. So that's a live facility which can be.
So people can apply to you for that. I mean, they can
yeah,
talk to you.
they need to connect with the SIDBI team for that. So it's a co-finance facility between SIDBI and Shell Foundation.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one question at the back, and then we'll come to round 2.
Hi, this question goes to Mr. Amitabh. You mentioned about the CSR funds, almost 50,000 crores is what you spoke about. So I focus on climate, and that's what I lead in the organization. So an approximate 5% of the GDP of a country is required. So in India, if you're looking at a $4 trillion economy, you're looking at minimum $200 billion on an annual basis. So a few $1 trillion are required to mitigate climate and also to adapt to climate. Apart from the fact that you need a few $100 billion every year to face the challenges of climate, which we are looking at. So how do you get this money, which is afloat, into climate, because it's a long-term game. It's not about renewables, it's not about EVs, it's basically looking at other aspects. So how do you motivate your corporates, HNIs, UHNIs to come and play a role here?
So, again, continuing the tradition of short answers,
Thank you.
philanthropists won't fill this gap. So private sector UHNI money will not fill this gap because they just have too many different priorities and too many different causes to fund. So, there are three kinds of philanthropists, right? I mean, our report talks of 6 different archetypes, but broadly, right, what motivates a philanthropist? One is passion. So somebody is deeply interested, right, in some topic. Now, whether that topic impacts the wide humanity or whether it impacts, whether it feeds 5 people is not relevant to that philanthropist, right? Because they're deeply passionate about it. The second set is really they are, struck by a need. So they see that there is a need. So there are hungry people, there are uneducated people, there are girls who are not in school, malnourishment. These are things that they are moved by, and therefore they will, fund those programs. The third is a problem solver mindset. So there is a person who wants to seize a problem and who wants to solve a problem. My guess is, this is not from inexperience, but my guess is that this third category is the kind of category that will be interested in climate change because it's a problem that they see, and it's a wide problem that they see. But it's also a problem that they recognize will take billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of capital. So while some of them, and there are some in this room, right, who will be interested and who will fund experiments, but what you can expect, to my mind, from them in the area of climate finance is that they will be happy to look at modeling. They will be happy to look at experimentation and evidence building. But the scale-up part, the capital that is required for that is just too humongous for wealth creators to fund out of their personal philanthropy. So that would be my answer to that.
Thanks, Amitabh. And I think that's exactly where blended finance comes in as well, right? Not a single type of capital is going to be able to solve this, but you need to bring in different types. All right, moving on to round 2. I mean, this was, we had the context setting, as part of round 1, but in round 2, really want to hear from the panelists on what they see as the key, levers of change that are really required to get more capital flowing into the sector. So maybe Amrita, I'll start with you and then Megha, followed by that. What are the primary challenges that you faced, and what are the 1 or 2 big unlocks that you feel will really get more capital flowing? And I'll just request all of you to keep the answers very, very brief and quick so that we can end the panel on time as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll just refer to our work in India and what challenges we have faced given the track record. So I think one thing which comes with all philanthropy is working with several partners at the same time, and we are trying to match up the speed and intent, and I think some of it was referred to in the earlier panel as well, but the alignment and the time to market. And I'm saying time to market till the time, concept stage to the launch stage. Sometimes it takes such a long time because you have so many additional players coming in that it loses its essence at some point. So internally, what we have also learned and understood is it is prudent to take a stock of situation, learn when to pivot, and learn when to exit a relationship even when it is not fully seen the light of the day. So there is no shying away from failure of a project. There's always a scope to learn, and I think in blended finance, for example, we have seen so many I would say cases and examples of blended finance transactions that have happened in the past. But still now, and I think many of us would agree that we think that a lot of time is taken to launch such products. There is a perceived complexity around it, but what can we do to do this better? So, for example, should we think about, say for example, that we had a program in the past, we have a partner who has worked extremely well with us, so then do we go back and top up or say continue with the same partner and increase the depth of the work with the same partner, because we are scared to again get into another long 12 months journey to do it. So I think there is a role to play for all of us in there in terms of, and thanks to the initiatives like TBFC and the Blended Finance Collaborative in this manner, where we still have some, right now we have some written examples of how things have worked in the past. But maybe more of that, maybe more platforms where things can get clearer for each one of us. What stakeholder and what is the risk and return matrix for each of us becomes clearer. I think another point wanted to make in terms of the public finances that are available today, and still we see that many of us are coming forward only as a loan provider to any transaction. So again, repeating the fact that given that we have the flexibility and agility of the capital, we are risk providers at the end of the day. So there is a time when we'll see probably more guarantee structures going up, and then the leverage will be much higher, and then the numbers we speak about of the 3-digit gap in funding probably can narrow down much better with the risk capital providing capacity.
Thanks. Megha, coming to you quickly, what do you see as the big opportunity or the levers that you think can really scale up financing?
I think Amrita has covered most of it. I'll just keep it very brief. Uh, Awareness around blended finance structures or outcome-based structures is very, very low, because of which a lot of investors shy away from going into that direction. Second, just the complexity of these structures, right? You're blending in financing from various different stakeholders uh, who look at benefits from the capital in a very different way, right? And then matching the speed of all the stakeholders. We all know that the development sector works at a very different pace than what the private sector works at, right? So again, coming to the point that Amrita mentioned, that time to market has been a key challenge. So some sort of templatization of the blended finance structures where investors have more visibility over how it would be stitched together, the time to market, etc., would really help. Another thing that we've seen is, which is rightly so, a lot of this blended capital is going towards the climate, right, sector, um, where there is a big need, but we would like to see more and more programs and structures in healthcare, livelihood, agricultural space as well.
Thanks. The reason I was smiling is I'm almost seeing the TBFC deck play out in my head, right? Because one of the reasons why we were set up is really to solve for some of these challenges, go to market, whether it's templatization, unlocking new pools of capital, new sectors. So I think really glad to hear of some of the validation around that.
And Aparna, it's the need of the market right now to for neutral agents like yourself to come in and work for all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So absolutely, we're very happy to have you guys.
I think, Matilda, I want to bring you into this as well. I mean, the challenges of CSR are known, so maybe let's not spend time on that. But very quickly, from your perspective, to see more CSR coming into this space, what are the one or two maybe levers or unlocks that you think would really help?
Yeah, I think it's already been covered. One is time to market, because CSR, as we know, is like an annual spend. It's also not unrestricted like philanthropic capital, so there's a lot of regulatory and compliance reporting. So if any structure which is worked well, how do we basically create awareness? We basically codify, we create a proof of concept, and then can basically take it out to like-minded corporates which are having the similar purpose and intention. So that is very critical. The other aspect is that when we look at some of this blended finance or outcome-based financing, it stops at outcome. How do you build in sustainability as part of the entire deal structure? It's very critical, because one outcome cannot define the success of that particular instrument, because at a grassroots level, when you're looking at development, there are intersectionalities which are there. So you have to put in the climate lens hat every time. You have to have a climate risk assessment or ESG evaluation, even when you're working on development agenda. So these are some of the very critical aspects that I think are going to be very important going forward. Other thing is that when you look at CSR, right, it started with something like a donation. It is evolving. So there are many like-minded corporates who are really doing good work, maybe but in isolation, standalone. But data in the country is not really available. So I think data, AI, blockchain, how you basically take a deal based on a baseline data, it's much more easy for the board to accept it. Until the time these conversations don't happen at the board level or at the CXO level, I feel we will be still scraping the surface. So if you have to look at disruptive change, You have to look at scale. You need to get technology and innovation and government to be a very critical stakeholder, not to forget the community. Because the community has a huge wisdom. Like when we work, we put community at the core and what is the requirement of the community, and then we go bottoms up. So I think when you're looking at structuring your blended finance, these are some of the aspects that we need to do.
That's super, super critical. I think just hearing from the community and having them, be part of the design as well. Satish, Hari, maybe I want to come to both of you as someone who's been, using blended finance a fair bit. What are some of maybe the innovations or the trends that you're seeing, in the design of credit enhanced structures that could really make this a lot more mainstream than it is today? And I can see Varun holding up the 3-minute signs. I'll request both of you. We will need a few more minutes. Sorry, Varun, we started late. But if you can maybe quickly, Satish, starting with you, and then Hari, talk about it.
Thanks. I'll try to be quick. So one is introspection, saying that not only grant funders like us, but the entire left end of the spectrum, which is any form of non-commercial capital, will take time to move the needle. And there are numbers that if we need to achieve that by 2030 the SDGs, any form of capital and do a price discounting, will still be 45% with the current rate. So there needs to be out-of-the-box solutions. One part which we've been working and we've been proudly associated with IIC since the last 1.5 years is the creation of this blended finance collaborative in terms of widening and deepening the knowledge, because we thought that across this continuum of capital there are players who may not be present, and their presence makes this a holistic platform, and sometimes things like master classes, things like deal trackers, currently you don't know how many deals are happening or blended finance deals are happening. So some of these information points and sometimes even de-jargonizing a lot of things, because in the financial world we make things very complex that we make clutter in our mind. So sometimes decluttering it. But the next step what we are trying, and which is after the blended finance collaborative, having a larger pool of partners, is to look at, action speaks more louder than the words. So how can we actually create an accelerator which can actually churn in transactions, and preferably in sectors which are difficult. You talk about sectors like health and clean energy. A lot of you see transaction flows happening now. But sectors like, say for instance, wash, which has an inbuilt problem of a long receivable cycle, say for instance. So for those sectors, social enterprises really thrive unless they have deep pockets, which not always happen. So are there ways we can create actual transactions through this accelerator, which shows, or I won't say templatize, but showcase marquee transactions, which then bring about a wider community of players to pool in capital, and that moves the needle through that multiplier effect.
Yeah, I think in terms of what we've seen is that we've been challenging our lending partners to move from their comfort zone of what they do well or what they would have required a guarantee, a much higher percentage, to move to lower percentages. Or entities who are anyway passionate to build the space to get into tougher asset classes. So Prabhav Foundation and Samunati, for example, have entered into a program to build gender and climate in agriculture at the same time. So it has to be a confluence of gender plus CSA for the portfolio to guarantee, and the partner is making good strides in that direction. But when we talk to a bank, we cannot talk about CSA. We say, hey, can you just simply do farmer interest group lending at an affordable cost and we'll give you a guarantee. So one is the choice of program and partner has evolved with that, and that's something which is a continuous conversation. I think the other conversation we increasingly end up having is about regulation, and that is also thanks to our responsible regulators who keep revising the regulation every now and then, which means that our best friends are lawyers, authorized dealer banks, and tax. So we are always kind of figuring out what is valid, what is not valid, especially given that we have to navigate as a foreign foundation a lot more regulation than a domestic. So it's refreshing to have a 361 who kind of lives there, Bangladesh says this is domestic onshore money. So one is we try to templatize that if there is a foreign philanthropy which also wants to give money in India to the structure, we have an offshore structure to accept a donation from a foreign foundation with Rabo Foundation, and we come in through the existing mechanisms. Certainly that's also needed for more such scaling up in this country. And I think a constant education of banks and NBFCs on what works, what doesn't work, what is possible under the existing regulation, I think something is a conversation to keep having to also keep updating the conversation, because with the ever changing, for example, digital lending guidelines have now come. So I think a lot of us in this room are scrambling to see what works, what doesn't, and I think that's where PBFC as a construct with the need to replicate standardize, I think is much needed, and it comes in at the right time, because many structures have kind of run their at least some course to have some track record, and now we need to kind of bring down the costs, because otherwise head office will say, hey, every time innovation is great, but this is just too expensive, and you can't be paying a lot of money to lawyers and accountants. I think that's the two kind of conversations. But of course, pushing lenders all the time out of their comfort zone is something which we are doing.
Thanks for that, Hari. And I think great to see. I think the shift now with even some of the fintech examples that we were talking about, to see that change also come about. Santashil, Amitabh, coming to both of you. Maybe Santashil, you first. From the government perspective, I mean, we've obviously now seen the Gift City, social stock exchange. Just maybe talk about a little bit about how some of these market structures can really help grow the blended finance space as well.
Yeah, I think the key to unlocking the government capital, I see two parts, right? One is the incentive. What is the incentive? There are two parts, right? One is the bureaucracy, one is the political class, right? In terms of the bureaucracy, what I found is that they're extremely risk averse for very good reasons. They are not incentivized like us in corporate sector to take risk and reap the rewards, right? There's no rewards to look forward to, right? So when I had proposed, like say, you mentioned social stock exchange as a way for creating impact bonds and for outcome and whatnot, they lapped it up. And the reason behind that is that, of course, there's a big financial ministry push on SSE, number one, but number two is that it gives them that transparency, right, which they are looking for. That if they do a private deal with a private sector, there's always some finger pointing can go on. But SSE gives them the legitimacy, right? That's number one. And another thing is that, of course, many of the sectors we target needs to be patient, needs to be long term. But for a political class, we vote for them every 5 years, right? That's something we need to, this is something my secretary talked to me, and we figured out a way to pitch, for him to pitch to the minister essentially, that this, we have to figure out a long term, of course, a long term vision, but then some short term ways to show progress towards that direction, right? These are the two things.
Thank you for that. And I know you'd also touched upon like a sandbox, for example, right? If it's in the payment space, the way that worked, I mean, if you're trying to bring in innovative structures, sometimes government is keen to come into some of the provision of a sandbox, for example, to test it out and then roll out a much larger scale, whether it's a facility or something else. But Amitabh, lastly, coming to you, I know you wanted to share these thoughts. So, what would it really take for us to unlock more domestic philanthropy? I know blended finance is not top of mind, but how do we get it there?
So I think four simple sounding but extremely complicated things. Right? So members in the panel already talked about language. So to me, that's probably the first thing, that the language around blended finance, outcome-based finance, social sector notes, or what have you, this really needs to get simplified. I mean, if you had blindfolded a person and he had wandered into some parts of this conference, he might well be he might think that he's in a finance conference, right? So this needs to become a philanthropic conversation in the first place, right? And now imagine you have a conference which says a critical examination of the efficacy of laparoscopic surgery in improving patient outcomes, right? Now that is what this sounded like. On the other hand, right, you have a conversation which says how do you ensure that patients go home fast and have less pain, right? Now, it's the same thing, right? But it's a very different way of saying it, right? So I think that's really the first piece. The language needs to change. The language needs to become simplified. The second piece is that there have to be clearly defined models of participation. I think some members talked about templatization. I hope that's what it means, which is that there are models of participation. You go to a philanthropist and say, you know what, you are thinking of putting in 50 crores this year. If you put it in A, B, and C models, this is the kind of outcomes you can expect, which is far more than what you would have got otherwise. Right? So the second piece is the models. The third piece is intermediaries, like Aparna, your company, the Blended Finance Company, and other such intermediaries. You need a set of intermediaries who act as the between the philanthropic capital and between the outcomes that they seek. So people who will put this together, right, without making the philanthropist sort of really think that he's going further and further away from his philanthropic intent. Because philanthropists basically want to do good, and they want to be seen to be doing good, and they want to be close to what they are doing. If you get them entangled in structures which take them further and further away from their core intent, which is philanthropic intent, then it's not going to work. So that's the third piece, which is intermediaries. And the last, to my mind, perhaps the most important, is that you need a few champion philanthropists who will stand up and talk about it. Who will say, look, I've done this. And this is what I was doing earlier, this is what it gave me, now this is what I'm doing, and this is what it's giving me. So you need a few respected, large philanthropists to buy in, and then you need them to stand up and talk about it. You do these four things, I think you will unlock a much larger proportion of philanthropic capital towards leverage, towards financial leverage, which is what I think what all of us are talking about. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much for putting it so succinctly and also holding up the mirror to all of us in the room. So thanks for that, Amitabh. I know we're fully out of time, but if we are okay to take one or two questions, is there anything burning, and then we'll close it. I'm not going to try and, okay, one question. So, no pressure. If there's anything burning, I know we had one or two earlier, but if not, I mean, all of us are also going to be, outside over, we have a tea and coffee break next. So you can find the panelists outside, and 5-minute break. Okay, I'll let you announce everything. So quickly, just scanning the room if there's any last question. Otherwise, I'm not going to try and summarize everything that was said. I think that's near to impossible. But maybe I'll just then quickly thank all of the panelists, for sharing your views and for leaving us on an optimistic point today. Thank you.